Hello and welcome to Channel 2S. I'm your host, Second Soundwave, and today we are looking at the super deformed EX Standard Destiny Gundam. But first, I think we need to fix a little something. That's better. So for those not familiar, the general overall theme of the EX Standard line is, well, standardization. They've standardized the price point. All the kits in this line are 600 yen, which makes them more appealing to foreign retailers who prefer to have set price points for everything as opposed to having a separate UPC for every single product in the line, since that can clutter up their systems pretty quick, and they might not want to dedicate 700 UPCs to a line that's kind of experimental and they're not sure might do well. So this way it makes it more appealing to places like Barnes & Noble, since they can just throw a whole case of these, whole assortment of them up on the shelves with a single price sticker on them. And it just makes it less of a risk for them that way. Next form of standardization is size, because SD Gundam is a really old line. There's over 400 kits in the line. But anyway, the SD Gundam line is really long and really expansive, and some of the old SD Gundam kits from way back in the 80s were basically just a head sitting on a pair of feet. So they were very short, very small little kits, maybe only about this tall. Really little guys. And then over the years they started getting bigger and bigger. This one right here is actually about as big as the old Seed SD kits. And then they kept on getting bigger, and right around the time Unicorn came out, they actually started getting really big and really complex. So if I pull in the Wing Gundam here, you can see this guy's from around the same era as the Unicorn kits, and he is really big, he is really complicated, he has a lot of part separation, he has a lot of functionality to him, and he's also really dusty. Just kind of, please try to ignore that. I haven't dusted this guy off in a while. And there's pretty much no hollow parts or very few stickers. It's basically a high grade. This is basically a high grade super deformed kit. But once they got to this point, they were like, 12 or 1500 yen kits, and Bandai was like, you know what? The SD line isn't really, it's kind of losing sight of its roots. It used to be like the really cheapo, easy entry grade Gundam kit line. Now they're basically just high grades, so they decided to kind of ease up on the line a bit, get back to their roots, and kick off the X Standard line. There's actually one more form of standardization that these guys have, but that's something I'm going to go over in the accessories department. So first, we're going to talk about details and articulation. So being a super deformed model, the Destiny Gundam does rely very heavily on stickers, although being an X Standard, it also relies on them a bit more than you might expect from one of its BB Senshi counterparts. A bit of a shame, but ultimately, it's not that much worse than the BB Senshi. It's kind of just that they have different stickers in different places. Also, the backs of the legs are extremely hollow. However, that's really the only point on this kit where the hollowness of the parts is really noticeable, as all the other hollow sections are actually covered up quite well and really not that noticeable. Now on to articulation. Super deformed kits have never really been known for their posability, but the EX Standard Destiny Gundam is actually pretty good. Starting off here with the backpack, there's no flapping motion of any kind, but you can bring the wings up like this if you prefer to have them open, and they look quite nice that way, I will admit. The shoulders are actually on a swing-out polycap, so you can bring the shoulder all the way forward to here. You can rotate it all the way around if you want. You can swing the shoulder out to about here. Does he have a bicep swivel? Yeah, he kind of does, because the shoulder's on a ball joint, so you get a bit of a bicep swivel. Although this joint really likes to pop out if you move it too much, which is why I'm moving everything so slowly on this guy. And then he's got a 90-degree elbow joint, which is quite nice for a super deformed kit. The wrists should be able to swivel, but if you move them even a little bit, it kind of pops them out of the joint, so not really much of a point of articulation there, which is kind of a shame. And as you can see right there, doesn't take a lot to pop the shoulders off of this guy. Which is one of my biggest gripes with this kit, is that the arm joints have a lot of trouble staying together, although that's something I've found to just be a general issue with SD kits and not something specific to this, so that's important to keep in mind. The head goes all around, looks up, looks down, looks left, looks right, rotates around. It can do a full 360. It's an SD Gundam, so of course the head is the main focus since it's basically the biggest part of the model. His waist actually has a nice little rotation here. Can it go all the way around? Yes, it can, actually. You can rotate his waist all the way around. Doesn't he have any front to back crunch? Little bit. I mean, it's mostly joint slot, but he has a little bit. Does he have any side to side? A little bit of wiggle too. Now, really surprisingly, the front skirt actually comes up on this. You can bring the front skirt up to here. Let me just kind of pop these off. We're going to get to those later. And the leg comes up to here, so the front skirt basically does nothing, because the leg only comes up to here anyways, so not a lot of front to back. But outwards, how's outwards? Well, outwards is pretty good. It goes right up about as far as the side skirts will let it, and since this is an SD Gundam kit, the side skirts do not move. The feet have plenty of ankle tilt, more than most high grades actually. In fact, they have more ankle tilt than they really even need, because you can actually make him kind of stand up on the sides of his feet a bit when his legs are fully spread out, which is quite nice. Also a lot of toe movement, so if you want to have this guy in a really wide stance, you can do so and he'll look great. And of course there's also a bit of swivel here, and also a little bit of swivel here, although not so much on the foot because the ball joint is actually facing this way instead of downwards, which gives you that nice bit of ankle movement and a lot of ankle pivot, but it means you don't really get any swivel here. So all the leg swivel you're getting is up here. So ultimately, for an SD Gundam kit, obviously you're not going to get the most insane kind of dynamic poses you might get out of a high grade or a master grade, but it's still really not that bad for such a small, cheap little kit. Now it's time to move on to accessories. So the Destiny Gundams always had a pretty wide loadout of accessories, so I wasn't really expecting him to come with too much when I went into this build. I was thinking he'd just have, you know, maybe his rifle and his shield, and that would probably be about it. Now he does come with the rifle. It's cast completely in the wrong colors. It is blue instead of gray and white like it's supposed to be. You have a handle here, you have a little peg here, you have a little hole here. He can hold it right in his hand, perfectly fine, just like that. And you don't get the shield, I will say that right off the bat. That's a little disappointing. But the bright side is that's the only physical weapon that you don't get, because if you come around here to the back, you get both the rifle and the sword, or whatever you call this, railgun, cannon, beam shooty spray thing. So, the sword. Of course it's the wrong blue. It's supposed to be a light blue, and it's supposed to have a little orange beam effect here. And they actually sculpted in the beam effect. However, it's molded into the plastic, so you're going to need to paint that a metallic pink if you want it to look proper. But you can stick this right into his hand, and it looks just fine. Looks awesome. It's his sword, of course. Now the gun's not so useful. First of all, it is completely the wrong colors. It's supposed to be green and red. But also, the way the hands are designed, if you remember back in the articulation segment, you can't really rotate his wrists, which means you can't have him properly holding the gun since he's supposed to hold it like this. So the closest you can get is to have him kind of holding it under his arm like a tonfa, which looks kind of silly and doesn't really fit how he uses it in the show. Unfortunately, there's no real other way to get him to hold it, so I usually just have the gun sitting off to the side whenever I'm displaying this guy. And there goes his arm. Remember how I said there was one other form of standardization the SD Gundams had? Well, that is standardization of functionality, because SD Gundam kits, especially the BB Senshi ones throughout the years, have always had some kind of cool little action feature built into them. Maybe it was a combination, maybe it was a transformation, maybe it's alternate parts that lets you build another mobile suit. Maybe it's just a completely random little mini thing thrown in like a Dodai or a Lodo that just, you know, some cool little extra accessory you'd never expect to see. Well, for the X Standard kits, the gimmick revolves around the fact that you can take components of the suit off, namely weapons, but also sometimes stuff like wings and V-fins, and attach them to a little block like this. And if you do that, you can make a variety of different weapons that can work with your SD Gundam and even with some of your high-grade kits, which is very cool. So, like we take this right here, I talked about it a little bit with the gun, but there are pegs and holes all over these weapons, and there are also pegs and holes all over the kit. Well, not so much pegs, but if you go underneath, there's of course a stand connector, which is the same size as these pegs, so if you want to have him doing something odd like this, you could. I don't know why I'd want to do that, but the option's there. And then you have pegs on the feet too, so if you want to pull his feet off and like attach it to the top, one of the feet to the top of the weapon for some reason, you could totally do that. But the official weapon combinations here, well, there's a couple of them, but one of them is basically just a cannon. So you kind of stick the gun on the side here, and then you stick this gun here, and then I think I actually have this backwards. It's supposed to have the hole rotating forward, because what you do is you stick the sword in the hole, and now you can put the rifle in his hand, and obviously it's going to look very silly, but he's kind of got like this big super cannon. And then if you want to do something a little more interesting, this is my personal favorite of the weapons actually, and yeah, I know his hand came off this gun. I'm going to have to quickly just pop this back into his wrist. But if you take the wings off, which thankfully do unclip fairly easily, I was a little worried about breakage with that, but haven't had any breakage issues with it so far, so fingers crossed. If you take this, let me see if I remember how this goes. Oh yes, you attach this to the front, you attach this here, and then you take the wings and you pop them in right here on these clips. And it makes you a pretty cool looking, come on, there we go, pretty cool looking crossbow weapon. Of course the Destiny Gundam can wield it because it's his weapon, but if you want to, you could put this on, say, your high-grade Revive Strike Freedom Gundam, and it would look pretty cool as well. And yeah, it's kind of silly, it's kind of goofy, but you have to remember, these are targeted at kids, and, you know, putting a little gimmick like this in makes it a little more than just a static model. It makes it a little more fun for beginning builders. So, overall, it's not really a gimmick that bothers me that much. And I mentioned this as a form of standardization because all the SDX standard kits use these same size pegs and holes, so you could combine all the weapons from your X standards together. You could take the gun from the RX-78 and the sword from this guy and, say, the Unicorn's V-fin and, like, stick them all together if you wanted to. There's a lot of combination options, a lot of customization options here, and it just makes for a really fun play feature. Now there's one final question many of you are probably wondering, and that is this better than the BB Senshi Destiny Gundam? And the short answer is, not really, no. The best way to think of the X Standard and BB Senshi versions of the Destiny Gundam is they're kind of like the Master Grade and the Master Grade Extreme Blast version. This guy right here, not a bad little kit. He does some fun things, he comes with the basic weapons he needs to come with, and he has a fun little gimmick to boot. However, the BB Senshi one comes with pretty much every single beam weapon that the Destiny Gundam is supposed to have. You get the Wings of Light, you get detachable boomerangs on the shoulders that come with beam effects, you even get his beam shield, and you get properly colored versions of these weapons and a nice little beam effect for the sword, and you even get a pair of open hands for his kind of repulsor blast thing that he did in the show. So you get a ton of accessories with it. But overall, as far as the quality of the base kit goes, it's actually about on par with the AEX Standard. Yeah, it's got a little better color separation, but for the most part, it's about the same size. It has more or less the same proportions and pretty much the same level of articulation as well. So what it ultimately comes down to is how much do you like the beam effect parts. You know, if you don't think you're going to display them like that, if you just want to make a display with a bunch of lead Gundams all on the same scale, that's when I'd recommend getting the EX Standard. If you just want to get a version of the Destiny Gundam and you want it to be the nicest version you can get, I strongly, strongly recommend the BB Senshi. But again, the EX Standard line, for the specific purpose of making a display with a bunch of different lead Gundams across eras all in the same size, it's not a bad line. And if you have, you know, a younger sibling or cousin or something that you want to get into Gunpla, this wouldn't be a bad first kit to get them. However, if you're a serious SD Gundam collector and you've already got the BB Senshi Destiny Gundam, I honestly can't really recommend this to you. There's really not any kind of improvement from it. So this concludes my review of the EX Standard Destiny Gundam. If you guys liked it, leave a like. If you have a friend who's considering picking one of these up or just curious about the X Standard line in general, be sure to share this video with them, as manual sharing is the best way to get these kind of videos out in this day and age. If you're new here, do subscribe by clicking the icon on the screen right about now. If you want to see some of my other stuff, there should be a little thumbnail with one of my other videos in it. I'm your host, Second Soundwave, and I will see you next time.